Trump sees Putin as a peacemaker.
The readiness of the Russian side to carry out possible mediation efforts were emphasized.
Putin, meanwhile, is thinking of new excuses to continue the war in Ukraine.
If we do not rely on our traditional values, then we will simply not exist.
I'm Albina Peterniak. We will analyze the news of Ukraine and the world together. US President Donald Trump plans to meet with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky during the G7 summit in Canada. This was reported by Axios with reference to its sources. White House officials said late Sunday that during the summit, Trump will meet with President of Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. It is also reported that German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba will participate in the event for the first time. Recently, Putin has been talking a lot about the need to protect traditional spiritual values. He has already said this is in an interview with propagandist Zarubin. Earlier, he held a meeting of the so-called Security Council of Russia, at which he also mentioned the need to protect traditional values because there is a threat to Russia's national security.
If we do not rely on our traditional values, then we will simply not exist. Russia will simply lose its identity, and this is extremely dangerous from the point of view of the future of the country.
С точки зрения будущего страны в высшей степени опасно.
Both the Russian people and all the peoples of Russia, since we have lived on the same territory for a long time, with some for centuries, with others for 1,000 years. Nevertheless, despite all the differences in religion and ethnic differences, we still have a common moral and ethical principle that is shared by almost all ethnic groups in the Russian Federation.
Есть такое общее морально-нравственное начало, которое разделяется практически всеми народными этносами Российской Федерации.
These moral and ethical principles are based on our traditional values. I repeat once again, their loss is very dangerous from the point of view of preserving identity and, as a consequence, statehood itself. That is why I began to talk about this when I saw that there was some kind of movement taking place within the country, within society, to introduce these ideas of the Western mainstream into the minds of the peoples of the Russian Federation if they wanted to seem civilized.
Внедрять в сознание народов Российской Федерации эти идейки западного мейнстрима.
It was then that I began to talk about this, not because, I repeat, I decided to argue with someone, but in order to prevent the collapse of Russian statehood from within. Well, these, let's say, civilized countries, the Olympics there, if you remember, are now shocking the whole planet. Yes, because this so-called global liberalism, as I have already said, has outlived its usefulness. In my opinion, it has turned from liberalism into totalitarianism.
Сам себя, на мой взгляд, он превратился из либерализма в тоталитаризм.
And to many people, including in the West, I have always said, yes, that we have a lot of people who share our position, and there are many in Western Europe and in America, including in North America.
И в Западной Европе много таких, и в Америке, в том числе в Северной Америке.
And that's how it happened. Probably, in all cases, I hope that our open, honest and clear position on these issues nevertheless supported those people who thought the same way as we did. And when the political situation changed, in the United States, they are still one of the leading countries in the world. They have a very large information resource. They have a very strong influence on the global economy, on the economies of many countries on our planet. And therefore, when people came to power who, in this sense, think approximately like us, everything is the same, nothing happens, but in general share these universal human values, this, of course, was such an impetus for the people in the world as a whole who were sitting there in the rear and just silently. Kept silent, not wanting to face this totalitarian approach on the part of the liberal globalists. They also fearlessly began to express their point of view, including on the political stage.
The Institute for the Study of War commented on the idea of making Putin a peacemaker in the Iran-Israel conflict. They noted that by offering to mediate in possible negotiations between Israel and Iran, Putin thus wants to divert attention from the Russian Russian Federation's war against Ukraine. According to analysts, this is how the Kremlin leader is trying to win over the head of the White House, Donald Trump, to his side.
Russian President Vladimir Putin continues to portray Russia as an effective and necessary international partner for the United States amid ongoing Iran-Israel tensions. US President Donald Trump stated on June 14th that he and Putin spoke by phone for about an hour about the ongoing Israel-Iran strikes and spent much less time talking about Ukraine than Iran. Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov stated on June 14th that Putin and Trump mainly spoke about military escalation in the Middle East. Ushakov claimed that Putin expressed concern over the escalation of tensions between Iran and Israel and offered Russia's assistance in negotiating a peace settlement. Trump stated that he reminded Putin that the war against Ukraine must end during the call. Putin is likely attempting to distract from his ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine by offering to help the United States mediate the situation in the Middle East.
Putin's supporter Ushakov gave details of all the talks between Trump and Putin over the phone. He noted that Russia is at the forefront of those who are supposedly ready to become a mediator and deal specifically with the Iran-Israel war.
Another telephone conversation between Russian President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and US President Donald Trump was made. The conversation lasted about an hour, 50 minutes to be exact. It was informative, frank and, most importantly, very useful. At the center of the exchange of views, of course, was the dangerous aggravation of the situation in the Middle East. Vladimir Putin, while condemning Israel's military operation against Iran, expressed serious concern about a possible escalation of the conflict, which would have unpredictable consequences for the entire situation in the Lower Eastern region. Our president informed his American counterpart about the telephone contacts held yesterday with the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Iran. The importance of preventing the escalation of the conflict and the readiness of the Russian side to carry out possible mediation efforts were emphasized. The President of Russia ridiculed that before the current escalation, we proposed specific steps aimed at finding mutually acceptable agreements during the talks between representatives of the United States and Iran on the Iranian nuclear program. And Israel struck literally on the eve of the next round of negotiations scheduled for June 15th. Russia's principled approach and interest in regulation remains unchanged and, as Vladimir Putin noted, we will continue to act on this basis. Donald Trump, for his part, also assessed the situation as very alarming, admitting, however, the effectiveness of Israeli strikes on targets in Iran. But it is characteristic that the Russian and American presidents, despite such a complicated situation, do not rule out the return of negotiations to Moderate on the Iranian nuclear program. By the way, as Donald Trump noted, the team of American negotiators is ready to resume work with Iranian representatives. As you know, 5 rounds of such indirect talks were held with the mediation of Oman.
I draw your attention to the fact that US President Donald Trump actually stated that during his conversation with Putin, he didn't discuss the war in Ukraine much. However, according to Trump, this discussion is planned for this week. Trump wrote about this on his social media, Truth Social.
President Putin called this morning to very nicely wish me a happy birthday, but to more importantly, talk about Iran, a country he knows very well. We talked at length. Much less time was spent talking about Russia/Ukraine, but that will be for next week. He is doing the planned prisoner swaps. Large numbers of prisoners are being exchanged immediately from both sides. The call lasted approximately 1 hour. He feels, as do I, this war in Israel-Iran should end, to which I explained his war should also end.
Remember how Trump compared Ukraine and Russia to children fighting on the playground and supposedly they should be given some time, then intervene. Now, similar rhetoric has been heard regarding the Iran-Israel war. Trump noted that the countries should be given some time to fight each other.
I think they have great respect for each other.
Can you give us
Go ahead, what?
Mr. President, can you give us a sense of what you're doing to try to de-escalate the situation between Iran and Israel?
Well, I hope there's going to be a deal. I think it's time for a deal, and we'll see what happens, but sometimes they have to fight it out, but we're going to see what happens. I think there's a good chance there'll be a deal.
Are you not surprised that Russia, which is the biggest terrorist threat to the whole of Europe, is currently in negotiation with the president of one of the most powerful countries in the world about peacemaking process on the other side of the world? In my opinion, this looks like complete absurdity. At the same time, both sides are absolutely convinced that the whole world will normally and adequately perceive both such statements and the same actions. Despite the fact that Putin already sees himself as a peacemaker and a great friend of Trump in mediation between Iran and Israel, Trump and Putin did talk about the Russian-Ukraine war. This was again confirmed by Ushakov, but he didn't say anything new.
In addition, during the conversation, our president informed Donald Trump about the implementation of the agreements reached at the meeting of the Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Istanbul on June 2nd. Our president noted that these days the exchange of prisoners of war, including seriously wounded, and prisoners of war under 25 years old is taking place. Ukraine also accepted 2 batches of those who died. The Russian country expressed its readiness to continue negotiations with the Ukrainians, as agreed, after July 22nd. Donald Trump took note of this information and reiterated his interest in ending the Russian-Ukrainian conflict as soon as possible.
Meanwhile, even propagandist Zarubin has a question. If Russia now starts to deal with the Middle East, what results will Trump and Putin achieve in this matter? I'll remind you that at the beginning of his term, Trump said that he would end the Russian-Ukraine war in 24 hours. 6 months have passed since these promises. And now Trump and Putin want to switch the war's attention to another conflict. Of course, we understand that this is extremely beneficial for Putin. Zarubin asked Putin's spokesman Peskov about the end of Russian-Ukraine war. Peskov's answer was very evasive.
After all, more than 6 months have passed since Trump's election. What prevents him from moving forward at the pace that he himself once stated at Russian-American conferences?
Do not forget that there is still a very large inertia. And this is the first thing. And secondly, after all, the Orgian stables of our bilateral relations are too dirty. Long and worse.
Meanwhile, North Korea could have lost more than 6,000 of its soldiers in Kursk. This was reported by the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom. It is noted that the main reason for the significant losses were large-scale airborne assaults with a high level of attrition of personnel. The total losses are more than half of the approximately 1,000 North Korean soldiers who were initially deployed in the Kursk region. Reports from open sources indicate that North Korea subsequently transferred a limited number to Kursk. I would like to draw the attention of our listeners to the fact that on June 4, the Secretary of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, former Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu, met with Kim Chen-in for the second time in several months. Intelligence believes that Kim Chen-in was a key interlocutor in the discussion on supporting the illegal attack on Ukraine. Thank you for following our news. I would be grateful for your likes and comments. This way, a large audience will be able to learn about our vision of world events. We will definitely see you soon.